Mr. Kishore, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very kind of you. I'm looking forward to this.
Great. To begin with, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the growth and evolution of the independent power sector in India and some of the twists and turns through which it reached the position where it is today and what the status of the sector is today.
The sector was opened to private sector in 1991. At that time, only private generation was permitted. I would say India is among the few countries that has actually evolved very well on the legislation side. 91 opening up did not really get a great amount of response. I remember our US ambassador mentioning yesterday that any company must have an India strategy, and the legislation therefore was not considered very responsive. Then we had a reform changeover in 1998, and a very comprehensive legislation followed thereafter in 2003. I must mention that it's possibly one of the most comprehensive legislations in the world insofar as this sector is concerned. It has a very clear reform path set. It's the right approach to deregulation, and I must say that the response has been tremendous. To just give you a perspective, private sector was hardly responsive till say about 2005. We have added post 1991 approximately 110 gigawatts of capacity in the country. Of that, almost 37 gigawatts has been added by private sector. In the plan of 2007-11, private sector is adding 30%. In the plan of 2011-2016, private sector is expected to add 60%. That speaks well of the legislation.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of international interest and investment in the power area, there was a very high-profile experiment made by Enron, which did not go very well. Did that offer any lessons to the sector and how things could be done differently?
Yeah, I think the very interesting movement forward, I must be pardoned for saying this, is that it has really brought out a need for local developers versus international developers. So we have seen the first phase of all the international developers like Enron coming in, and the substantial part of the changeover has happened. So much so that what we looked forward to the world for strategic investors today has been replaced by a huge amount of financial investors occupying the space. So there is that amount of interest has continued. Money has come in large quantities, large numbers, but essentially driven by local developers being in the lead, which is what is shown in the results.
That's very interesting, and I'll come back a little later to the idea of international investment. But tell me a little bit about your own company, KSK
We
Power.
were both Sastry and myself. We are the two founders of this company. The KSK initial stands actually for our respective names, our expanded names, so to say. And we were advisors, typically called investment bankers. We used to do a lot of advice on the power sector. At a time, I think we realized that we need to prove or hold on to what we advise. So we took up a 20 megawatt plant in conjunction with few strategic investors. But I think the real development we took up was in 2004. So we did a 26 megawatt capacity in 2004, costing us approximately 25 million. Today we are almost a gigawatt of capacity in operation, and we have also financially closed one of the largest projects in the country for about 3.6 gigawatts. So from 2004 to say 2011, we have been entrusted, is what I would say, with almost $1 billion of equity and about $3.5 billion of debt. So the whole environment, if you so say, has been very responsive. If you have the right business model that's bankable, sustainable, and competitive.
What would you consider the right economic model?
As I said, the customer must necessarily get power at a competitive price. This has been our thrust. Earlier on, I mean, you quoted an example, I have many more to quote. India was giving an impression, or an impression was gained, that India needs power at any cost. We are a country that is very clearly voting for darkness versus light, so to say in a very cliched way, if it's not competitive. Enron as an example, I keep quoting this, gives about 14% of the electricity for the state of Maharashtra and was taking away 55% of the receivables of the state, which means it was like eating into the, it was like a marginal cost was so high. Right. I'm sure people on your sector will understand. It is abnormal. So there was tremendous amount of resistance. Even today we live with 40% people not having electricity. So as a nation, we are very clearly communicating that we need power, we need electricity, but not at, at any cost.
So what made it possible for, say, the local power generators to come up with a revenue model that is so remarkably different that they were able to provide power at such a more competitive rates when Enron's costs were so high, or at least the prices were so high?
Yeah, see, basically, I think, and pardon me for saying this, the Western world has really seemed to communicate. See, on one hand, we are saying there is demand. At the same time, we are saying the supply shall be supported by contracts. Okay, if you believe demand, you know there is demand for cars. You don't insist on someone giving you a contract for purchase of cars. We are aware that electricity as a commodity is not bankable. But we know there is huge amount of deficit. Okay. Now, the moment you use a generator to be a financing intermediary, he will ensure that all contracts are secure. And the moment you make contracts very secure, so to say, in terms of an international lender coming in, an international investor wanting to endorse it, which is what a strategic investor brings in, you can never have a backup or fallback on the developer, and that reflects on the cost. The Indian developers are all very conscious that these are realities. Just to give you an example, annually, if you see last 10 years, the Indian power sector gets about $15 billion of debt. You'll be surprised, not even 5% comes internationally. 95% of the debt is supported by Indian lenders alone. Okay. Now, if you look at it from that perspective, the lenders there are very conscious that almost 50% of the contracts are not fully tied up. Either there is not fuel tie-up, not converted into an agreement, land acquisition exists, possession not given, evacuation agreement signed, substation not ready, water allocation done, you are able to see political guys opposing it every day. Just imagine an international lender who sits outside the country wanting to take a view that all these will get sorted out. In my view, it won't be possible. I will not appreciate this point. So this is exactly where the whole opportunity is.
Right.
How are you going to be responsive to the situation? Because the stakeholders, even at the ground level, are aware of this.
Right.
The guy who sells land knows that there is no competitive guy to come and buy his land, but he still will protest to the extent that where the breaking point is. So this is where the whole system has encouraged entrepreneurs like us to find that international entrepreneurs are not coming in.
Got it. Now, what kind of regulatory challenges did you face as you were going about building your company?
I think there was huge amount of ad hocism. Honestly, today if you see, even today the complaint, so to say, will be that power sector is deregulated. Every sector that needs to support the power sector continues to be government owned. Okay, so you have the power sector generation delicensed, evacuation still is monopoly, government control, fuel supply, government control, water, government control, railways, government control, allocation of wagons, government control, equipment supply, we have only one government company. People to be brought in, government control. So what are you doing? You are now enabling this sector, opening up, saying you do anything, but you have a set of contradictions. And the reactions are completely ad hoc. All of you must be reading about how the Environment Ministry is reacting to it. So I keep saying this, there is no problem of lack of policy. There is lack of coordination.
So how does an entrepreneur resolve these contradictions?
This is the only contribution. We are happy there is no coordination.
Right.
We are happy there is no integration.
Got it.
If you actually go to two departments, they are talking two different languages.
Yeah.
You have an environment minister who tells us about whether the country must compromise between growth and environment. It must be the prime minister of the country. With due respect, he's a great, extraordinary personality, a political leader. But this is the problem. But I think that's where our opportunity is.
Coming back to the financing situation, could you tell me a little bit about the capital markets and the way in which you were able to raise the financing you needed for your venture?
See, when we actually started off, I think we have done a very interesting deal at stage one. We are the first company to look at this entire need for disintermediation. We are the first company to look at sale of power directly to the consumers. And we actually got into a relationship with the consumers where the consumers invested in the equity of our company. They invested equity and they got no return on their equity. So it's a very interesting position for us. Partly bridged this, but we never compromise on returns. That was an outsourcing model. Additionally, we also got a very interesting, a very unique deal with Lehman Brothers, where Lehman Brothers invested $9 for every dollar we invested. So if you look at the extent of our leveraging, I think we are the company that leverage almost 99:1, where partly equity came from Lehman, partly equity came from our customers. We have now built almost a gigawatt of capacity based on this model, and we continue to hold 65% of the equity. I would certainly urge all your people to look at our model. It's very interesting. I'm not taking pride for that. But that's how it enabled us to take us to a different level. But as promoters, we had no money. So ours is the first company that went directly to get listed on the London market, where instead of listing the holding company that held the underlying assets, we listed the promoter holding company on the London market. We are the company that was listed first on the AIM market. Now we are on the main board. Our shares were issued at about 107 pence in November 2006. The share is now trading at about 560 pence. So it's a very heartening thing to look at that. So we raised money there. Then we raised money on the Indian stock market. We got the Indian listed entity also done. That was in June 2008. So between these two companies and Lehman and customers, as I said, in the last 7 years, we raised almost $1 billion of equity.
One last question. Through this entire journey, what would you regard as the toughest leadership challenge you have faced, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn from it?
I think the most important thing is you cannot be very structural, you cannot be very hierarchical, and you have to be extremely footloose in your response. You cannot be very strong on ego. At least in our sector, we have seen that while at the federal level, the government of India is saying we desperately need power and will give you all support. Then we have the local government that says they'll give you all support. There's a huge amount of expectation, completely contradictory and on a different plane at the local level, which is the ground level. I think all that we did was no jackets, no ties can work. We need to just roll up our sleeves, go and talk to the local people with the feeling that we belong to them. And I'm very happy to say that possibly KSK is the only company in the country that has done possibly the maximum number of plants in maximum number of locations. There is no equivalent of our company. We did a 20 megawatt, 25 megawatt, 58 megawatt, graduated to 135, made it 540, then now 3,600. We have done about 11 plants in 8 states. So this entire learning has been to be completely micro on almost 50% of the issues and insist that all your people are motivated in that direction. The company today has grown from almost about 40 people in say 2005, 2006 to more than 1,500 direct employment. So these set of people have actually been motivated to understand in this process that you have to be extremely responsive. I think that's the biggest takeaway. I keep telling people in management schools that if you look at supplies in India, don't go by contracts, take the view on demand, I think it's a great opportunity to look at.
Sure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great.